final reminders. Next Monday, final paper. You're doing the final paper. Also review day for final exam. And then the following Monday is our final in here. And also, just as a reminder for our online guys, I'll go ahead and put the test up for them next Monday because I usually get my online students a week because Blackboard is Blackboard. But it has to be done by that next Monday because the Tuesday is the day I have to have all my grades in. So get it done, please. Let me just quickly do this. That is 102. 16. All right. So, any questions before we start? Good. Okay. And again, just as a further reminder, none of this is on the test. I just want to get through to finish World War II, so that for any of you that decide to show up for movie day, we'll be up to the Cold War. And again, as I've said several times, for my own sake, because I have to have the timeline move forward. I mean, I'm that way with like movies and books and games, and it's like, oh well, the old ones aren't that good. Just start with this one. Like, I can't. I've got to have. It's like, oh, just read the synopsis for the old ones. Like, I can't do that. I just can't. So we're gonna move ahead. We finished with this. The Beer Hall Pooch, which did not go well for our little Austrian boy, ended up in prison, wrote Mein Kampf. Meanwhile, the Weimar Republic was stabilizing. So, actually, things weren't looking good for Nazism in Germany, which, is good for everybody else. Okay. Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia had all begun pushing for authoritarianism. They wanted more land and also attempted to maintain some level of ethnic purity, which of course led to incredible violence. Expression of nationalism in groups without a nation. So they basically were trying to either... Let me rephrase that. If you have ethnic groups without a nation, you're not going to be like, okay, well, let's get all of our people in an area, and then we're just going to, like, draw a line, and this is where we're going to be. That idea doesn't work. That idea is, instead, let's wipe out all the other people in this nation, and then it'll be ours. That's how this sort of nationalism worked. So many people that were on the receiving end of that would flee the nations, wandering into countries without any kind of identification. So the League of Nations, which was still around, even if it wasn't able to do much, created the Nansen Passport, which didn't really ease the tension of impoverished countries absorbing more impoverished people, which, again, as I said, this is why we don't have, like, the Roaring Twenties and then the Great Depression. The whole interwar era was just bad for Britain, bad for Europe. Nationalism and ethnic determination, increased interest in the health and with the physical health and spiritual health of the populace, Women who had gone to work during the Great War were expected to return home and rear strong children. The ideal man began to resemble the classical Greek and Roman statues, which is to say the working class, rather than the short, rotund, and plain-looking politicians. So this, seen as the stereotypical, strong, handsome, and it's particularly in Nazi Germany, blonde hair, blue-eyed, etc. There was some level of cultural experimentation during this time period. Things weren't just everything's bad and also fascism's happening. Picasso and Kandinsky continued to push the artistic envelope. Also housing, simple cost-efficient housing plans. Soviet Union created public kitchens and nurseries to further emphasize communal living. Existentialism, your perception as to what was real after the chaos of the Great War. Idea of enlightened knowledge was pretty much dead because, this idea of enlightened knowledge really didn't sit well with how can enlightened people brutalize each other the way we did in World War I. We, of course, have jazz, film and radio, magazines, comic books. So the middle class were able to achieve entertainment in a new way. And this is where modern art starts to kind of lose me, because it's that, which I kind of get in the way that it's it just is sort of expressing the chaos of the time, if that's what they're going for. Now, if this is supposed to mean anything other than chaos, I don't know. If I was in a museum and this was on the wall, and there was a plaque next to it that said, the embodiment of chaos, I'd be like, oh, okay, I get it. But if this was portrait number 5, I don't, what? Because there's so many of these modern art paintings that are just such and such number whatever. I'm that doesn't make any, that doesn't mean anything to me. So this is the point at which modern art and I kind of start to diverge. We have these lovely concrete block housing units in the Soviet Union. Isn't it nice? This lovely, lovely stuff. There's actually, for people that studied this sort of thing, architecture, there's actually eras of Soviet architecture that you can actually see in the way that it's built. Different eras of who was in charge and how they were doing economically. It's apparently a thing. You can look at a building and be like, oh, this was built during so-and-so, and it was in this part of the Soviet Union. It's a whole thing, apparently. I know this just looks like a big square, concrete block to us, which it kind of is. But yeah, it's apparently a thing. There's a lot more to it than what we're currently looking at. Obviously, the Great Depression still did happen, so things went from not great to worse in Europe. So the countries devalued their currencies and set up trade barriers to try to stabilize their economy, which just made things worse. The Kreditstaat, which is Austria's largest bank, failed in May of 1931. German banks followed. September 21st, Great Britain devalued the pound, set up tariffs, and that was it. The economy is gone in Europe, essentially. Countries scrambled to get off the gold standard, and the common man was looking for solutions, and oftentimes the solution looked like this. unfortunately. The Germans were hit the hardest by the Depression because they were already in really bad shape. Um, Look to Paul von Hindenburg, who was elected president in 1925, but he was elected as president because he was popular, because he was a war hero. He didn't really know much about politics and didn't know what the hell he was doing. So he was pushed to elect a chancellor. He appointed a number of chancellors, and they all failed at their job. So he appointed Adolf Hitler, who was someone who could get things done, and then he could be kicked out once he was done getting things done. Which, those of you that have been paying attention in this class, and particularly also last semester, may recognize this pattern of, hey, here's someone who is good with the people, and at least in the previous cases, also the military. Let's get him in, he can get some stuff done, and then we'll kick him out. Recognize the previous times this has happened? Maybe. I don't know. The book doesn't actually say, but I could see that. Right. I know, we were going to talk about Night of the Long Knives, but the book doesn't say that Hindenburg was killed. I could see that. So, do any of y'all remember previous patterns of someone being brought to power and then taking power? Well, there was one real recent, historically speaking, or in the class. Well, not really, not that recent. The real big important one ended up taking over most of Europe. In France. Napoleon, yeah. Remember? He was like, oh yeah, we'll bring this guy to power. Because Sieyès was like, hey, Napoleon can get the army on our side and then things will be fine. And Napoleon takes over. And before him, last semester, they try to do that with Julius Caesar. And then obviously, we all know Julius Caesar. He was like sort of the first emperor of Rome. Granted, he ended up getting shanked within like a year. But we all know who Julius Caesar is. I mean, his name became the title. So, yeah. So Hitler was one of the little people, not noble, not even much of an officer in the war. I mean, he was a messenger runner. He had plenty of other little people behind him, which is to say most of the German population. So here is Paul von Hindenburg with all his probably ridiculously heavy metals. So the people that were behind Hitler were really the reason that he was able to come to power. Erwin Göring was the Prussian minister to the interior, which rounded up enemies of the party. Heinrich Himmler expanded the SS, or Schutzstreifen, which is the security guards. That's the internal, internal military. He got a hold of Heinrich Schardt, whatever. Economists put in charge of the Reichsbank to save the German economy. Joseph Goebbels, who was the orator who basically was Minister of Public Enlightenment and Propaganda. I mean, it's in the name. Goebbels was all about propaganda. Other than Schacht, none of these guys were highborn. None of these guys had anything to do with old nobility. But Hitler saw their skills and put them to work. And they were able to stabilize this new Nazi state and, help them seize power. So they started harassing Jews, trade union bosses, communists. Ironically, it was a Dutch communist who tried to set fire to the Reichstag that allowed them to secure power. He use emergency power to basically make it so that he could do whatever he wanted, passed the Enabling Act that gave all power to the executive branch, and then that was essentially it. He can now do whatever he wants. Enemies of the state were arrested, sent to detention camps, leftist books and other material were burned in huge bonfires. You know, I guess the modern day version of that would be deleting lots of stuff off the internet that was seen as being harmful to what the state wants. Germans put to work on large projects, autobahns, and housing developments, are guaranteed a low wage, but it's a wage. So you've got the Autobahn. Hitler here is breaking ground, which is just a bit important symbolic thing. Here's a nice big composite image. Again, him breaking ground and others working around him. There's the Autobahn completed, which is what we based our interstate around. Here we are. So the SA started getting out of hand, which seems weird for Hitler. And its leader, Ernest Röhm, started making noise about merging the SA with the regular military, which would have basically put Ernest Röhm in charge of the military. So the Gestapo and the SS were ordered to get rid of the SA. So over the course of 3 days, they murdered Röhm and 90 supporters. This was known as the Röhm Putsch, which also neither of the long knives. This caused a lot of outrage, even within his own party, because, I mean, he was wiping out his own guys. Obviously, Goebbels, using his propaganda machine, quieted things down. They had a Nuremberg rally, was filmed with the famous filmmaker Leni Riefenstahl, emphasized the unity of the Nazi Party, because you can't have any dissent if everybody's unified, and everybody's unified if the people who aren't unified disappear. To El Salvador. I mean, concentration camps. So these were a set of laws to protect German blood and German honor, which are just really anti-Semitic laws. Biological ancestry of Jewish man or woman, setting aside the pure Aryan race. Jews were considered stateless, given no rights that would normally belong to a German citizen. If you had more than 2 Jewish grandparents and couldn't prove an Aryan heritage, you were labeled a Jew and were therefore made no longer a citizen. Oh, yeah, that's the Nuremberg laws. And it was regardless of whether you were like a Christian in terms of religion, Jew was considered a like racial characteristic. So Mussolini went back to Ethiopia after, we talked about Ethiopia whipping Italy a while back. They used saturation bombing and chemical weapons, killing tens of thousands of Ethiopians while 3,000 Italian soldiers were killed. Saturation bombing, if you're not familiar, it's the sort of bombing where you're not aiming for anything, you're just hitting everything. If you ever see saturation bombing from the sky, it looks like you're dropping leaflets, but they're all bombs. It's just, it's hard to even describe. It's just like, how does a plane even have that many bombs? So Italy and Germany signed the Berlin Axis Pact, and eventually signed the Anti-Comintern Pact with Japan. Spanish Civil War happened. Miguel Primo de Rivera, yada, yada, yada. Eventually, Eventually, this is what's important. Generalissimo Francisco Franco was the fascist side. And because he was fascist, Italy and Germany were like, hey, we'll help out. And so they sent, like, weapons and arms, and Hitler even sent the Luftwaffe to bomb the crap out of Spanish cities that were not under Franco's control. Do I have the picture of? Yes. Guernica. This is another Picasso piece that visually just describes the chaos of your city being bombed in the middle of the night. You wake up and your house explodes. Or vice versa, I guess. You're running out of your home. People are dying in the streets. Stuff's on fire. There's animals running around because a lot of these places were rural. And it's just chaos. And this I understand. I mean, you can see people and like lights and animals and the chaos of it. And again, like people, like a mother holding her child and dead bodies and people just, it's just chaos. So again, this I get. And also, like, I know the story behind it. Also, this isn't a little painting. This is the size of like a billboard. And it was unveiled at one of the world fairs before before World War II happened. And Germany was there. And it was very specifically unveiled. I mean, I think like not just Germany, but like Hitler was there. And it was very specifically unveiled to piss off Hitler. It was very good. Because obviously, again, Picasso was Spanish, so this was very important to him. So yeah. So we had the Anschluss, which is basically just Austria merging with Germany. There was going to be a vote. Then Austrian Nazis staged a coup. German forces moved in. Then there was a 99% majority supporting the Anschluss, because, yeah, that's legit. So, yeah, Germany and Austria merged, and Czechoslovakia is totally safe, guys. Don't worry about it. There's just some happy women throwing the Sieg Heil. They're holding people back. I mean, they were pretty chuffed about the whole like Anschluss thing because they got to be a part of like Greater Germany when Austria was in pretty bad shape. So I wouldn't. 99% though doesn't seem right. Like not even 99% of Greenland is like, we don't want to be part of America. That's dumb. Now it is still like 90%. But 99% doesn't feel right. Anyway, let's get to World War II real quick with the time we've got left. Where did my mouse go? Okay, there it is. Right. So, began rearming Germany, discontinued reparations, took lands and goods from Jews, because, I mean, they're not citizens, so they don't have rights, so why would they have rights to land and goods? With Hjalmar Start, began to pour sums of money into the buildup of the military. He also knew that the homeland needed food, oil, rubber, and iron, which is to say more than they were able to produce with the land that they had. So they had a plan to have Germany ready for war by 1940. 80% of the Reich spending went into the military. So, yeah, they were ready for war. Also in a new order in Europe, Aryans, which say Germans, Britons, and Scandinavians on top, Latin people, French, Spanish, and Italians next, and Slavs at the bottom, and Jews weren't even there. Like, the Slavs were seen as, like, literally a slave race. Jews weren't even given that. Like, it wasn't, oh, we'll make Jews into, like, our slaves. Like, no, they're not even worthy of that. Oh, by the way, the Anschluss, the joining of Germany and Austria, was specifically disallowed by the Treaty of Versailles. By the way. So this thing that they did was specifically going against the treaty at the end of the previous war. And also, like, the military buildup. And also discontinuing reparations. Like, all this stuff that he was doing was going against this treaty that Britain and France should have stepped in and done something about. But they didn't, because they didn't want to have another war. And also, technically, America should have, but we were being isolationist little weenies and didn't do anything about. Because, oh, well, it's not our problem. It'll never be our problem. Don't worry about it, Hawaii, you're fine. Yeah. He wanted to move on the Sudetenland, which is a territory in Czechoslovakia that had a bunch of Germans and also all of Czechoslovakia's industry. So Britain and France flew to Munich to discuss it with Hitler. Mussolini was there also. Also, Joseph Stalin was there. Joseph Stalin wasn't there. And also, the president of Czechoslovakia wasn't there. So, like, hey, we're going to take some land from Czechoslovakia. And France and Britain were like, okay, we're going to come talk to you about it. But we're not going to talk to Czechoslovakia about it. So, Chamberlain was like, okay, well, Hitler promised that he was only going to take this land from Czechoslovakia and there was going to not be any more. And he declared he had secured peace in our time. And then by March of 1939, he had taken the rest of Czechoslovakia. What a surprise! Hey, so you know how Putin only wants to take, like, eastern Ukraine? Yeah, that's the thing. He only wants to take eastern Ukraine, just a little bit of Ukraine, not all of it. And then he certainly wouldn't want to take Poland afterwards. But yeah, it's fine. So the Axis powers: Germany, Japan, Italy, Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria. Obviously, only really Germany, Italy, and Japan are the ones we're going to really worry about. So yeah, there is Czechoslovakia getting just consumed. There is Chamberlain. Yeah, he was ousted pretty quick after this. There's the Night of the Broken Glass, which is just one big old pogrom. With taking Sudetenland, they acquired a lot more Jews because, hey, Jews live other places in Europe too. They burned synagogues, ransacked Jewish businesses. At least 90 Jews were killed, thousands more imprisoned. Also, there was the German euthanasia campaign, known as T4. Basically, those that were seen as unfit to reproduce, which is to say largely mental patients, were euthanized, which is, if you're not familiar with what that word means, they were put to death for being unfit to reproduce. To, quote, prevent the spread of unfit genes. And in case you haven't had my American history class, while we didn't go that far, we were sterilizing people that were seen as being unfit to reproduce here in America in the late 1800s. And he just took it a step further. They brought in more Germans from outside countries, and they began pushing more and more. So there's it was called Night of the Broken Glass because this was the most visible representation of it. Was like the storefronts that were owned by the Jewish citizens. Well, not citizens anymore, I guess. The Jewish people were busted out. So there's a lot of that. And then also, of course, synagogues being burned down. But I guess Night of the Burning Synagogues doesn't really roll off the tongue as easy. Also, there weren't as many synagogues. Like, there was a lot of storefronts and not that many. Because, I mean, it's Nazi Germany. There weren't a lot of synagogues around. Also, there was this pact between Hitler and Stalin. As I mentioned before, communism and fascism are polar opposites. by comparison, like democracy and capitalism is in the middle. And with Nazism moving east, it was only a matter of time before Nazism and communism came into conflict, and it was going to be bad. Stalin knew he wasn't ready for a war. He had just purged his army again. And the USSR wasn't even really fully neutralized yet, as we have seen. So Nazi diplomats went into the Soviet Union with a non-aggression pact, which shocked the hell out of everybody else. Which, again, here, this is the image I was talking about, where it's like, I don't know who should be more concerned. Although, if you think about it for more than 2 seconds, the Nazis should actually be more concerned here, because Stalin has definitely killed people with his bare hands. Now, again, I imagine the Nazi probably has too, because he's a freaking Nazi, but he's in the Soviet Union. He's surrounded by guys that Stalin could just, like, look at and, like, tilt his head, and they would put this guy down. However, there were secret provisions. The Soviets could take Finland, Eastern Poland, and the Baltic states, as long as Germany was allowed Western Poland and Central Europe. So it was, the non-aggression pact was, as soon as stuff goes on fire, we're going to move in, you guys can have this, and we'll have this. But it did also lead to this lovely cartoon of someone is taking someone for a walk, where you've got Hitler and Stalin getting along really well there on the eastern frontier, but both of them are holding a gun, which was 100% true. It's just that Hitler pulled on Stalin first. So, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war, but didn't really do anything. So Poland was left to get the crap beat out of both Germany and the Soviets. So in less than a month, Poland fell, while a third of it was taken from the east by the Soviets. Split into 3 provinces, the east for the communists, the west for Germany, and the middle third was set up as a slave colony. Yeah. So there's the Luftwaffe, there's what's left of some of the cities, and the Germans, the Soviets. There's the map that I used in my American history class too. Yeah, it was, there was not much left of Poland by the time, there was nothing left of Poland by the time they were done. Which again is why I say, if Ukraine falls, they're next. Because after World War II, Poland was part of the Soviet Union. I'm just saying. As they moved into Poland, their goal was to purify Poland for German occupation, executed Polish and Polish Jewish leaders, any peasants that tried to resist. Mental institutions were wiped out because they're just a waste of resources. Under Soviet control, were no better off. The Katyn Forest massacre, where 20,000 Polish officers, teachers, and businessmen were rounded up, shot, and dumped in a mass grave, was blamed on the Nazis until 1990, when the Soviet Union fell, and we actually got access to Soviet records that proved, oh wait, the Soviets actually did it. Because when you find a mass grave in the middle of a forest that dates back to World War II, and the Soviets say, oh, the Nazis did that, it's going to be like, okay, yeah, I guess the Nazis did that. Who's gonna be like, I don't think the Nazis did this. Why would the Nazis do a mass grave? You're going to believe them. But then it turns out that, oh, actually it was the Soviets. However, there was a massive population of Jews in Poland, and for the most part, Hitler had been deporting Jews up to this point. Sending them off to black sites. Other countries. And there was this plan to ship them off to Madagascar, for reasons, I guess. but, well, Britain rules the ocean and you can't get past the British blockade. So let's send them to crowded, filthy, overcrowded, tiny, filthy, overcrowded ghettos. Warsaw was one of the most famous and most brutal because you're putting in a bunch of people in a tiny space and they're going to die of disease. And this is before concentration camps. Here's the Katyn mass grave. This is obviously years later. They're largely decomposed, but this is the mass grave of like 20,000 people. This one is a fun one, actually. Far more fun than the Katyn Forest Massacre. So Stalin decided to attack Finland, which was one of the few democracies that has survived all this time. And he decided to invade Finland during the winter because, I mean, whatever, right? The Russians can fight during the winter. Well, apparently, the Finnish can fight during the winter better. In 3 months, the Finns lost 27,000 troops and the Soviets lost 258,000. Now, granted, Stalin's willing to throw away men. So the Soviets were victorious by March of 1940, but 420,000 fled the country and reopened the war by June of 1941. Yeah, the Finnish don't play around. The Finnish, there's a this is again another like just evergreen meme where it's just like a picture of just like a snowy landscape, and it's like spot the Finnish sniper, and then I think or sometimes it has like a second one and it's just like red boxes everywhere of like where the Finnish sniper is, and it's just because they're everywhere in the snow. That's how the Winter War went for the Soviets, was just there's a Finnish sniper everywhere. Enigma code. Germans would move based on where resources were. Went to Denmark and Norway to secure iron. British, French, and Polish intelligence cracked the Enigma code, which is what the Nazis would use to secure their messages. But it was still difficult to decipher. It wasn't just like, oh, now we can read their messages whenever they send them. They send the message, and it would still take like a while to decode the message with the Enigma machine, which is now it was just like a whole movie now of like how the Enigma machine was made, and how horribly they mistreated the man who made the Enigma machine because he happened to be gay, and that was illegal in Britain, and they ended up like chemically castrating him, I think, and it drove him into depression and eventually suicide because, yeah, that's how you treat your war heroes, Britain. But it did allow the Allies a heads up on his plans. German troops invaded Belgium and the Netherlands, and actually by May 21st, the Northern Force had reached the sea. The Blitzkrieg, which means lightning war, was all mobile units. It was all trucks and tanks and planes, and like the infantry needed to be on a vehicle to keep up with everything else. The British Expeditionary Force, along with some of the French, were cut off from the main French army. The German general ordered a 3-day halt to conserve fuel. It's theorized that this order actually came down from Hitler because he wanted to give the British a chance to escape in order to try and broker peace with the British because of the whole like the Britons are part of the master race thing, and he'd rather make peace with the British than have to destroy them like he was going to destroy the French. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Supposedly, it's one of the many theories to come out of World War II. This does result in the Battle of Dunkirk. There was a 3-word transmission that came out of the troops at the beach of Dunkirk. But if not, which comes from Daniel 3:17 through 18, basically, deliver me from, it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, if I remember right. Basically, deliver me from the lion's den, but if not, no, it was Daniel. Deliver me from the lion's den, but if not, take me, Lord, etc. Churchill organized a flotilla of ships, navy, private, fishing boats, tugs, just whatever could float. Get down to Dunkirk and get our boys out. To sweep in and pull out 225,000 British and 120,000 Allied troops, which was called Operation Dynamo, while the German and British forces clashed above. Yeah, Battle of Dunkirk was pretty cool. Meanwhile, France surrendered on June 18th. They set up a government in exile up in northern Africa, and a collaborative Vichy France was set up in northern France under Philippe Pétain, which is to say, it was a puppet government set up by the Nazis. It's like, oh no, France is still here, guys. Listen to the France. And it was just a puppet government set up by the Nazis. Most of the fighting in France happened under the French resistance, and they didn't play around. They killed a lot of Nazis. We make jokes about the French, and that's just a thing in history. But the French resistance was not a joke. They really put the screws to the Nazis. So yeah, there's Dunkirk. Do I have any more pictures of Dunkirk? No, just that. Actually was reading this thing about someone doing I think it was a tabletop, like Star Wars, like the original trilogy. And this like elderly couple came over, and he was explaining to them like what Star Wars was, and it's like, yeah, these guys are the rebels, they're the resistance, and these guys, this is the Empire, and the guy's like, oh, so like the war, like clearly World War II. It's like, yeah, well, these guys were literally called stormtroopers. Like, okay, so space Nazis. Like, yeah, space Nazis. And so these guys are like the French resistance. Like, yeah, basically. And so the old guy was like running it like it was a commando ops in the war, which was really neat to read about. So yeah, they were old Star Wars rebels, essentially, in France, putting the screws to the stormtroopers, although these stormtroopers could shoot. Meanwhile, Britain was alone, and Hitler knew that he couldn't do an amphibious invasion because, well, Napoleon couldn't. So he used his air force to bomb the British into submission. The Luftwaffe hit military and then civilian targets almost daily. But by the 25th, the RAF was hitting back thanks to the Enigma machine, and then later they started using the radar. The radar was a really, really new technology. It's not that they were like, oh, maybe we should use the radar, this thing that we've had. It was like brand new. And they were able to like get it functioning enough to actually help. By October, he gave up on bombings, or gave up on invasions, but he was still using bombers, and eventually the V-1 flying bombs, known as buzz bombs, and then eventually V-2 rockets to hit British cities. The buzz bombs were weird. They look like a regular like bomb you would drop out of a plane, but they've got little tiny wings, and like a propeller, and like a little radio antenna on them, and they've got a gyroscope inside them, and you basically wind them up and just launch them off of a catapult, like a pneumatic catapult, not a arm catapult, and as long as they're set in the right direction, they will fly until they get to where they're supposed to go. They're programmable, but like analog programmable, like you'd program an analog clock. It's real weird. The V-2 rockets, that's when we launched our Apollo spacecraft space program with. We stole a bunch of those from Germany after World War II, and that's where our Apollo program came from. The Blitz from August 1940 to May 1941 was called Churchill's and Britain's finest hour, as they, lasted through basically daily bombings without giving in. We also had Franklin Roosevelt's Lend-Lease program to keep the British supplied. Here we go. This is the, is that the Spitfire? Yeah, that's the Spitfire. That is known as the plane that saved Britain. It's a really good airplane. I did a lot of writing on this back in undergrad. One of the early test pilots for it, after he took it on its laps and landed, he reportedly got out, and as one of the flight technicians came up, reportedly he said, "Don't touch anything." Basically, don't make any adjustments. It's perfect as it is. They were really good planes for the era. So there's London on fire. This is a really famous image of St. Paul's Cathedral shrouded in smoke. Supposedly, Hitler told the bombers not to hit like any major cultural sites because, again, he was trying to get Britain to surrender, but then work with Germany. Hey, look, we're back in the London Underground because it made a really good bomb shelter. So yeah, folks sleeping in the subway. Subways back then were a lot cleaner than they are today. The floors weren't as sticky. There's folks just hanging out after the bombings. Kids outside their home, not doing great, but This is a propaganda image, I come to find out. But it's like, oh yeah, even the milkman's out doing his job. Gotta deliver milk to whatever houses are left, I guess. Also, apparently, Queen Elizabeth II, the one that relatively recently died, she drove an ambulance during World War II. She was driving an ambulance around in all this. So she was there, doing work. So I thought that was pretty neat. Meanwhile, Mediterranean, Mussolini tried to invade Egypt and Greece, got whipped because Italy. Hitler had to go down and help out. Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, kept things tied up in northern Africa and Egypt in 1942. So there's Rommel. He's known as, quote, one of the good Nazis because he didn't really agree with Hitler's stuff. He was just oh, he's a tank commander. He's just doing his job. He's doing his job as a Nazi. Even if he's not we're going to kill all them Jews Nazi, he's still a Nazi. Now, that aside, he was still a really good tank commander. Skill-wise, he was still really good at his job. But his job was still to fight for Germany. So, Balkans, things weren't good. Bulgaria and Yugoslavia joined the Axis powers. There was a coup. Yugoslavia and Greece were quickly occupied. Starvation was rampant. Yugoslavia, there was this resistance. Basically, lots of real fun ethnic cleansing happening in Yugoslavia. This eventually led to Josip Broz, known as Tito. He eventually liberated Yugoslavia in 1945, which is actually important to where we're going to get to a little bit later, because while he was communist, he liberated it before the Soviet Union came in, so that never became part of the Soviet Union. So technically, Yugoslavia was an independent communist nation. Anyway, here's a bunch of kids in Greece starving. So, that happened a lot in the war. There is Tito. Meanwhile, Japan, taking Manchuria, Chinese capital Nanking, killed several 100,000 civilians, while also, this was the, do I have it? All right, here we are. Japanese troops poured into the Yangtze Valley, attacked the capital city of the Chinese Republic, Nanking. Soldiers unleashed ferocious violence, killing several 100,000 Chinese civilians in the episode subsequently known as the Rape of Nanking. Yeah, they occupied the city for weeks, and if you can tell from the name, did what they wanted to the civilians. And I'm gonna do it again, but there was actually a Godzilla movie about this in a way, because was it actually was that actually Abe that came to power? The prime minister that got capped by a homemade gun. Anyway, there was a shift in the Japanese government recently. Well, in the last, 20 years, where they were going to start rewriting their history books and start taking some of the bad stuff out. And this was going to be one of the things they were going to kind of gloss over, is, some of the war crimes they did in China. So actually there is unfortunately the name of it is horrendous. Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, All Out Monster Attack. It's just called GMK for short. Where Godzilla exists as this vessel of the spirits of the people wronged by Japan in the war, and he's literally this avenging spirit of rage, and it's about for how forgetting your past can literally come back to hurt you, and it was a call out by the people of Japan against their own government. So yeah, by the way, that's what that's about. So yeah, they moved into the French, British, and Dutch colonies. They, of course, then carried out the preemptive strike against Pearl Harbor. Was it the Battle of Midway that the tide of their expansion turned back? Still, though, America was dedicated to the policy of winning Europe first. So for quite a few years, the European colonial populations just had to deal with Japanese rule, which wasn't great. The Japanese were as racist and eugenic as the Nazis were. Here's Nanking. There's Pearl Harbor again. I just talked about this in my previous class. That's the Arizona. I just remembered that today. There's Midway. All right, let's get to Barbarossa. So, June 22nd, 129 years and a day after Napoleon invaded Russia, Hitler sent an army of 3.2 million soldiers across the border in a line stretching nearly 600 miles. Hey, maybe learn from history and don't do that. Soviets lost 1,811 planes on the first day. The Luftwaffe lost only 38. Stalin took the news so bad that he was basically in a daze for several days. They began moving munitions and industrial factories east behind the Ural Mountains, which is to say they took the factories apart and physically moved them across the mountains, which was only possible because the government controlled the factories and could get the workers to physically take the factories apart and move them across the mountains. There was no, hey, DuPont and GE and whatever, we need to do this. It was, we run these factories, you need to do this now, or we're going to lose it all. Leningrad was besieged for 872 days. Stalin called on all citizens to resist the invaders, which is to say, throw your lives away. Special commandos were assigned to the Wehrmacht, the Einsatzgruppen, and they were not there to fight in the army. They were there to fight not soldiers, such as Jewish women and children. Roll in, kill civilians. So here we have some artillery. The line rolling into Russia, which, good Lord. I mean, an 800-mile, that's how long it was, right? Borderline stretching nearly 600 miles. Okay, yeah. I mean, our East Coast it's about 1,000 miles long from, well, from Florence to Rhode Island was about 1,000 miles. So yeah, that's a lot. So the Hunger Plan was crafted, suggested that 30 million Soviets would have to starve so that German troops could be fed. Which, I mean, considering what the Soviets had been doing to the Ukrainians, that's just par for the course in the East, I guess. Hitler declared that the Geneva Convention did not apply to Russians. Because they're not people, I guess. 3.3 million Russian prisoners were captured for 1941. 600,000 were labeled as Bolsheviks and shot on the spot. The rest starved, froze, or were worked to death. And by January of 1924, 2.25 million were dead. So yeah, you didn't want to be captured by the Nazis. I mean, obviously, but like, yeah. The Germans were pushed south to Stalingrad, which became the turning point of the war. Stalingrad was a meat grinder. Both sides poured troops into Stalingrad. The city was leveled, but they just kept fighting. My brain's not working. The instructions for the Russians was basically line up like 10 deep. Only the people in the front have rifles because we don't have enough rifles. When the guys in the front die, just grab their rifle. When you run out of bullets, use it as a club. When the club breaks, pick up a brick and use a brick. Because the buildings are all destroyed, so there's bricks everywhere. Like, you need to fight like a caveman. This was also the year that the final solution began. So we'll have to talk about that too. There's Stalingrad. Oh, I do not have any more than that? Oh, we'll come back to Stalingrad. So, the final solution. We've been talking about the Jews being pushed out of their homes, into ghettos, starved to death, or shot by the SS. But with the invasion of Russia, we have several million more Jews being brought into Hitler's regime. And it's like, all right, well, this is taking too long. We need to put a system together to get rid of the Jews properly. And this is where the Holocaust truly began. Because all the stuff before wasn't actually that. Now we've got it going. The T4 program had officially discontinued in Germany because I guess they'd wiped out all the mental institutions. And then they sent them east to start working on death camps. Most infamous of which was Auschwitz, which was started in a concentration camp in Poland. And by the end of the war, 6 million Jews had died at the hands of the Nazis, although his goal was complete and total genocide, which of course means all of them. So, you know, it was a job not fully done, which a bunch of really psychotic Holocaust deniers would be like, well, if 6 million wasn't all of them, so it wasn't a genocide. It was an attempted genocide. There is Auschwitz and the camps after they were liberated. this is one of the this is one of the Holocaust memorials that often like tours the country. You'll see. These are the shoes of the people who went to the gas chambers, because well they were forced to strip down and like remove all their possessions before they were sent to the gas chambers. Because obviously after that they'd just be tossed in a furnace. And you know most of their belongings were either stolen and sold, and the clothes would deteriorate over the years. But the shoes tended to stick around. And, you know, a pair of shoes is a person, was a person. And that's the easiest visual representation of just a fraction of the amount of people who were killed. All right, let's try to get the rest of this done. Lots of propaganda apparatuses outside of the Soviet Union. Well, the Soviet Union had their own propaganda. Hitler and Goebbels, of course, had speeches to convince their listeners to the Jewish enemy. Allies had Roosevelt and Churchill's fireside chats. The Allies also had Edward Murrow, American reporter who lived in London during the Blitz. Actually, let me read this one from the book because it's really good. It actually gets me a little choked up. Here we go. He reported from rooftops, said that his microphone would record the sound of the bombs and the anti-aircraft fire, and praised the, quote, black-faced men with bloodshot eyes who were fighting fires, and the girls who cradled the steering wheels of a heavy ambulance in their arms. The policeman who stands guard over the unexploded bomb down at St. Paul's tonight. His reporting so effectively tugged at American heartstrings that a leading media critic wrote of him, "You burned the city of London in our houses, you laid the dead of London at our doors, and we knew the dead were our dead, were all men's dead." So Edward Murrow, this guy here, was an American reporting from London, and I mean, again, just on the radio, but so captivatingly reported it that people here in America felt like they were there experiencing it. And that's a good way to get people emotionally involved in something that's not technically theirs, but I mean, again, it's a worldwide war where we should be more involved than we were. Science. Well, not all good. German scientists like Dr. Mengele, oh my God, this horrible monster, used prison populations as lab rats, or as he called them, his rabbits, which is to say he would torture and kill Jewish people for fun, for all sorts of horrible experimentation. He especially would experiment on twins to see if like harming one would cause the other to feel pain. Yeah, they did all sorts of really horrendous stuff. Also, atomic power was discovered. Manhattan Project to make an atomic bomb. Most important was in Los Alamos, New Mexico. They never got to use the bomb on the Nazis because, well, they're German, so they're white people. We can't do that. But they did 100% use it on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing 70,000, 40,000 people immediately, and then leaving thousands more to die from their wounds or radiation, which if you make it in for movie day on Tuesday, that's where we start. Well, it's the Trinity test first, and then the Trinity test was in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and then Hiroshima and Nagasaki. There's also a technique to mass produce penicillin, which was super important. I mean, not like that in terms of impact, but saved a whole lot more people. Meanwhile, in Russia, soldiers were reduced to cannibalism in Stalingrad. The Soviets finally managed to push the Germans back. 90,000 German soldiers taken prisoner. The Axis lost 80,000, while the Soviets lost 1.1 million. Production centers went back in full swing. They outproduced Germans 3-1 in small arms and 4-1 in tanks, which is insane. That the Soviets had tanks, but they were like outproducing the Germans by that extent. There was a massive battle at Kursk. 770,000 Germans hit the Soviets, but the Soviets had 1.3 million troops. The Germans lost 50,000 men and were pushed back. Kursk, by the way, is the largest tank battle in history to this day. It was. I've only got a couple of pictures of Kursk. Was huge. This was still a meat grinder. 84% of German losses were from the east. So whenever you see movies about World War II and it's like, oh yeah, we've got Normandy and we're moving in and taking France and all this, most of it happened in the Soviet Union. 84% of Nazis that were killed by Soviets. Which is why, another plug here, Call of Duty, World at War, you get to play as a Soviet soldier. It's split into two campaigns. You've got the European campaign and the Pacific campaign. In the European campaign, you crawl out of a pile of bodies in Stalingrad, and that's where you start. And then you fight your way all the way to Berlin. Whereas in the Pacific, you obviously start in Pearl Harbor and then make your way across the islands as an American soldier. But yeah, you start here. And it's rough. There's Kursk. I think you also take part in the Battle of Kursk, because I remember there's a small tank battle, or small tank section. Here's a real famous image of a tanker, as they're called, who was injured after his tank was hit and managed to get out of the tank, but died not long after. There's actually, again going back to my old games, a Mech Warrior version of this, which I didn't understand the first time I saw it, but then I saw this picture, I'm like, holy crap, they were referring back to an old World War II image. That's so cool. All right. So, British General Bernard Montgomery, American forces pushed the Germans out. They invaded Italy, but were stopped in the mountains because, again, taking Italy is a pain in the ass because of mountains. Il Duce was kicked out in prison, but he was set up in northern Italy to continue the defense. Again, Il Duce is Mussolini. June 6, 1944, we got D-Day, where they invaded Normandy. Most of the beaches were completely undefended because of several counterintelligence campaigns. The big, Germans are up in the machine gun nest, and there's, the tank traps and all this. That was, 3 of the 12 beaches. The, Saving Private Ryan or the start to almost any other World War II game where you're starting in Normandy. That was the exception rather than the rule. Because of the counterintelligence campaigns that happened before then. Because that's how wars are won. You start the war with outmaneuvering the enemy before you even send guys in. Anyway, Paris was liberated by August. There was the Battle of the Bulge, where there was this huge German push back into the Allies, where the Allies were not able to invade German territory until March of 1945. So there is D-Day. The tank. I can laugh at this because nobody's hurt. The tanks weren't doing too good on the French roads. And the worst part about this is the only way to pull a tank out of that is with another tank, but you run the risk of getting the other tank stuck too. Oh right, Dresden. We firebombed a civilian city to get back at Germany for bombing London, and it ended up killing between 25 and 40,000 civilians. Many of them were refugees fleeing the Soviets. Because, we can murder civilians too. So there's Dresden after we burned it down. It wasn't a military target. Berlin, Soviet forces moved in slowly. They did stop in Warsaw to let the Polish Home Army, which were Polish nationalists, be killed by the Germans before they moved in, because you don't want Polish nationalists. Can't have that, because they were going to, occupy Poland once this was over. Mussolini was captured and hanged by Italian partisans, upside down by piano wire, by the way, which is a thing they do. Well, not the piano wire thing, but anytime that there's like a fascist running for office in Italy, they'll take their campaign poster and hang it upside down, just to remind them what happens to fascists in Italy. Hitler capped himself in his bunker, knowing what would happen if the Soviets got their hands on him. It would not be fast if the Soviets got their hands on him. Third Reich finally capitulated, agreed to unconditional surrender. Soviets had most of Eastern Europe under their control. Allies had France, Western Germany, part of Austria, yada yada. Tito had managed to free Yugoslavia rather than getting the Soviets' help, so the Yugoslavia was independent, as I had mentioned. There's what was left of Berlin. It was street to street fighting in Berlin. There is the Russian soldier putting the Soviet flag over the Reichstag, which again, this is the guy you play as at the end of World at War. You actually, that's your final mission, is to plant the flag at the Reichstag. You get shot halfway through, and they take the guy out, and you're wounded, and making your way. That they make it overly dramatic, but it's very good. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, real bad. Okinawa and Iwo Jima especially. It would have cost hundreds of thousands of lives, and of course killed a lot of civilians if we had actually invaded Japan. Firebombing of Tokyo, which was extremely bad too. That's basically, we're dropping napalm on one of the largest cities in the world. And again, if you guys come for the movie Tuesday, their bomb shelters were not saving them from the fire bombs. Like, they were safe from the explosions, but the heat was so extreme they were being cooked in the bunkers like ovens. And some of them were jumping in ditches full of water, and the water was boiling them alive. So, then the atomic bombs happened. And then also, Soviet Union declared war, and they finally surrendered. So we have Iwo Jima and Okinawa, and then finally planning for the future here. See, where is? Oh, also, where's this? Yeah, the USSR was just like, let's just grab some dudes and execute them. 70 million died, 6 million Jews, of course. Gypsies, Slavs, homosexuals, many others were also targeted. About 5 million of them. So there's after after World War II. And the Cold War. I found that one in a recycle bin and I had to include it. All right. So that has you guys ready for next Tuesday if you want to do that. Again, next Monday is review, so make sure you're here for the review day. And that'll really be it. I mean, unless you're doing the second paper. So make sure you bring that in if you're doing that. Otherwise, see y'all next week. That's fine. Yep, that's fine.